Hi, this is Alan Mackay, and in this tutorial we're going to go through a bit more of fume effects and how to work with it. I'm recording off of my laptop, so it mightn't be the greatest speed to work with. However, first of all, I've created a container, as I'm hoping everyone knows how to do. And I just need to create an emitter, so I go to helpers down to fume effects. I'm just going to work with a simple source in this example. Drag it out into the viewport, and I'll just position it in here a bit. Okay, now let's go into the Fume Effects UI. I'm just going to add in the emitter. And I'm just going to specify an output location. Here, just put it in my default location here. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do is let's create some fire initially. Just in my simple source, I've added my emitter in here. I'm just going to set the temperature to maybe 900, like a higher value, to make the fuel hotter. More importantly, make it rise up further. Before I go any further, I'm also going to set up a light. Lights do not affect fire, however they do affect smoke. So we do want to have like a self-shadowing smoke and everything. So let's go enable shadows, make it ray traced or whatever I want to do, and under shadow parameters just enable atmosphere shadows. Let's create a camera as well. So this is all pretty straightforward. And okay, so from here what I want to do, back in Fume Effects, I'm just going to go in and add in my light. We'll worry about this later on, but under illumination we can add in our spotlight. We won't change anything else. So initially we have our fuel, which is what is generating our fire. Okay, so we're going to use that, and we're going to animate the value to start at 0, and we're going to have it ramp up to 10 at frame 10 to 100, and then at frame 17 back to 0. Fuel is what's going to drive the fire, so initially setting up the fuel will allow us to give it a burst of fuel to burn. The temperature is set to this, which is good. Smoke, technically, what we might do is something a bit more tricky. Let's say the smoke is based on the fuel, and then we set the value. So that might be interesting. It'll give us a burst of smoke with everything, and everything else we'll leave alone for the time being. Now let's just run the simulation and see what results we get. My resolution was at about, I think, 80 or something, so it's not too detailed, but it's detailed enough. We can see here we're getting a nice kind of burst of fire, which then turns to smoke and rises up. So it's very simple in terms of what it's doing, but it works. So yeah, my voxel resolution is 60 by 80 right now. Might just make that a little bit tighter to work with. Now, what I'll do here to make it a bit more interesting, first of all, let's bring the burn rate down to about maybe 20. This will make the fuel take longer to burn, so therefore the fire will last longer. However, it won't be as explosive. So we'll also set the expansion to about 4. And that will tell the fuel to expand as it burns. So what we get is fire that lasts a bit longer, but also will expand out and make it look a lot more explosive. So right away here we can see that the fire quickly kind of blows out and then rolls up into flame. Quite simple, but it does work. Now let's do something a bit better. Let's get our fuel and make it last longer. So let's bring up a curve so we can see what's happening here. So what initially happens is we get this quick burst that then takes a while to die out, so we get a bit more of a lasting, lingering flame. I'll make it kind of come back again for a little bit. Alright, so all we're doing is we're playing with the fuel. Now, let's make this a bit more interesting. Under turbulence, we can bring the turbulence up a little bit, and we'll bring the scale down. This will make our fire a bit more turbulent. Other things we can do, we might make it as explosive. We'll bring the expansion down a little bit, bring the burn rate variation up, meaning that some bits will die out sooner than others. Nothing too crazy. And we'll just run this again, and obviously it won't be as explosive, but it will have a bit of turbulence, which will give it a bit more of an interesting look. Rather than being a big ball, it's starting to have a bit more of a nicer feel to it. Also, having the emitter lasting longer now, we get a bit more of fire coming up, which eventually dies out. Again, just additional things to kind of help us give it a better look. So let's play what we have. We just get this big fireball that kind of goes out. Alright, so from this stage, let's just change this around a little bit. I'm going to right click under rendering tab, right click on my color, which is orange, bring this up, and we might just have it, I kind of start out at yellow and then go to more of a orange or whatever color we kind of feel like doing. We'll bring the opacity down, we'll bring up our color graph, and this just gives us a bit better fire to kind of work with. Okay, so explain the color graph. Basically, this is the very center of our fire, and this is the very outer rim. So sometimes, like, I usually will want to probably just ramp up the base here and give it fall off. Okay, depending on what kind of fire I'm after. More solid fire, I might play around more, but usually I have this kind of ramped out like that, and that just means that after my simulation, I still have control to make things a lot more solid if I want, rather than having it really solid and going, okay, well, I can't go any further, having to resim. So usually I'll work from here, and this just means this is the outer surface. This is like the outermost bit of our fire, right? So I can get this, I can move it out, and as we can see, it's filling up the fire. So this is how it's going to blend with the smoke. Okay, so that'll work for the time being. Obviously, higher voxel resolution, better results. This stuff here is a tutorial. I'm not trying to make it too advanced. Usually I work on a quad-core machine. Unfortunately, I'm staying in a hotel right now, and I've got my laptop. So that will work. I'm going to right-click on keyless mode, change it, and just make it a dark gray for smoke. We'll revisit smoke soon. But let's go and make this more interesting. Let's go back to simulation tab. We'll bump up the turbulence a little bit more. However, we don't want the turbulence to flicker around too much. So let's set the frames, which is actually frequency. If you think about it in terms of turbulence, is we'll set that to 17. It's a bit more laggy. We'll set the detail up to 5. Things like quality and iterations, we'll bump that down to maybe 70 for the time being. Just so that way we kind of cap the amount of calculations that go into it. Now, let's go into fuel, and we can tell the fuel when it burns out to create smoke. This is interesting because it means that as the fire burns, it's generating smoke, which will help us give it a much more of a filled feel. So right away we can see smoke's coming out, the fire is burning, it's expanding, it's more turbulent, and it begins to burn and flare up. As this happens, it's generating smoke, which is quite cool, and eventually as it goes out, it becomes a big smoke cloud. Now I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to go into Rendering tab. Now down to Smoke, I'm going to bump up the opacity to 8. I'm also going to turn on Cast and Receive Shadows, and we're going to render this out. Suddenly we're getting this thick smoke, which looks quite nice. Again, the voxel resolution is quite big, so it's not that detailed, but you get where we're going with this. Let's bring the rendering resolution down. I'm rendering at 1024 by 768 to give us a bit more real estate with our recording. Well, a bit better resolution for downloading, I should say, but unfortunately it is very cramped to work with. So now we've got like a thick cloud to work with. Let's bring that up again. What I can do here is bump up my colors so we get a lot hotter fire. Now I might go on illumination, turn on multiple scattering. What this does is, based on the fire and smoke, it illuminates this. So right now it's blowing out to white because the smoke is illuminating so much. If I turn off smoke, put it to a value of 0, we can see the fire is now illuminating our smoke, which gives us a very interesting look. That's kind of cool because it means we get better integration. I'm just going to change my fire color a little bit. But the whole idea is that you want to get more integration between, integration and interaction between the two. So that way the fire does feel like it's illuminating the smoke. Gives it much more of a realistic value, like a kind of look to the whole thing. So I've made it a bit more red, and as we can see, the results are there. If I bump up the value of our multiple scattering, suddenly it's a lot more bright, a lot more explosive. I'll lower it a little bit. So let's say it's good, but it's spreading out too much. We can use the fall off value. We'll put that to like 8. Suddenly that's going to push it in more to make the focal areas a lot more hot where it needs to be. So this is a way to kind of restrain it more. I might make my smoke color a little darker again. But we're getting some interesting results there. Now let's make this a bit more interesting. Let's first of all bring under simulation we got buoyancy. Buoyancy is like we got gravity and buoyancy, but buoyancy is essentially the reverse. It's when things get hot, they rise quicker. So we have temperature, which tells it to rise quicker. It tells it to burn and ignite fuel. But we have this is like a global thing for like all of our emitters. If we had multiple ones, we can bring this down. It'll tell our explosion not to rise as quick. Okay, so we bring that down a little bit. It won't rise as much. Now I'm also put up my heat production, which also helps with making it rise and burn. And we'll make this a little bit more explosive. And let's run the simulation again with a little bit more detail. I'll pause the simulation while it runs, but we'll see the results. I might bring my burn rate down a little bit, therefore it takes longer to burn, so I'll bring my expansion up a little bit as well. Let's run the simulation and see what we get. So I did make one slight change. I brought the expansion down just a little bit because it was a bit too extreme for this resolution. But there's our result. We've got a nice, cool explosion happening here. So again, that's a very basic way to do an explosion, but it allows you to get some cool cool results. The main thing to keep in mind is that you want to bump the detail right up. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm on my laptop, so it's pretty amazing I'm able to get these results on a laptop. But yeah, having a quad core or something like that to work with is always going to be a preference to this. But in a nutshell, that's a way to create a nice pluming explosion, and I'm sure you can add a lot more to it from here. Thanks everyone for listening, and good luck.